Hello, my sweet and beautiful people. Yeah, you. Yeah, it's me, Galen. Ta-da! Hiya, Galen's got Parkinson's. I'm going to talk to you today about goblins, but very specifically about my goblins. Doctor, I've got goblins. Oh, I'll give you some ointment for them. Must be painful. But not them sorts of goblins. No, I don't know what I'm talking about. I've lost it. Help me. So, the first picture coming up now. They're the first goblins I ever saw as a war game fantasy player. I was at the War Games Club and I went in to play 25mm Napoleonic with my little Prussians, and two of the university lads had come on from university and they had goblins and dwarfs and elves and some big trees. And I asked, The Hobbit, and one of them went, oh, it's Lord of the Rings. Never heard of Lord of the Rings. Anyway, I went and I learnt about that, read Lord of the Rings, fell in love, got it. So the company that made them was called Miniature Figurines from Southampton in England. And they were licensed to the Tolkien estate to legally produce his figures for wargamers to recreate battles using Tolkien's stories. So they were created so that you'd get an army, like you would maybe a Napoleonic army. You'd perhaps have 30 elf archers and a commander, and you'd use Wargames Research Group rules, and you'd play a Battle of Pelennor Fields, Manus Tirith. You might do Helm's Deep, things like that. So they were under license, they were legal, they were called the proper things. If you look at them now, some of the figures a bit iffy, but that's what they came up with, and we were more than happy. So they were my first ever goblins. I loved them. They've got really long, dingly legs and arms. They're all bow-legged, big heads, and they've got sort of dragging their bows across the floor. And there are some, I've got them, but I'm not so keen on the figure. And they've got like a really slender scimitar over their heads. When you compare the size of those bows and arrows, they're only going to be like little pinpricks, aren't they? I mean, some of my later grenadier orcs are firing, the bow looks like a tree that's snapped off a big branch, firing these arrows that are about 4 foot long. So they were the first ones I ever got. Cue second picture. As Dungeons and Dragons became more popular, I started playing right at the beginning, 1978. That's when it arrived in the UK, and that's when we started playing it. And it was new, it was exciting. We didn't know what on earth we were doing. We'd seen, we had, I've still got the Giants 3 trilogy of the Giants. The one that was hardest was called The Glacial Rift of the Frost Giant Jarl. It was a killer. I'll go through it one day. I've still got them all. And then there was the Tomb of Horrors, which was S1. That was a special one. But by the 80s, when I was running wargame role-play clubs as a teacher, Dungeons and Dragons was becoming really popular. People were arguing about it. They were saying, oh, it's bad. It's got demons, Dungeons and Dragons, and other people were saying it was a soft game. You know, there were people quite happy in England. Oh, George kills a dragon, but you can't kill one in a role play. Or I started doing it because I was reading books to the children. I taught children who, generally speaking, had little English. They were coming over from other parts of the world, and they were lovely kids, but their understanding of English wasn't great. Now, if you've got an 11-year-old child who cannot read English, at the time in the early 80s, the answer was give them a book for a 5-year-old and expect them to learn English like a 5-year-old would. And they were ridiculous. You know, Jack and Jill and all that rubbish. So, but reading them stories at the right level, we could do. And we could engage imagination. So I read The Hobbit. And that was, you know, it got really exciting. And we were drawing fantasy maps. And every table, I had 30 children in my class, and there were 5 tables of 6, and each one became a party of adventurers. And they all threw dice, different weird dice, and added them together, and maths lessons without any having to read. Because if you can't read English, you can't do science. So they call you a failure. It's not the science you can't do, you can't read the English. Maths, they give you a question, you know. There's a train coming from Birmingham at 70 miles an hour, and another train coming from John O'Groats at 12 miles an hour, and Mrs. Smith's bought some apples and he stood on the track. At what time will she get run over? Well, you're not getting to the maths because you're trying to work out the nonsense of the flipping question. It's poor. I'm on a high horse now, I'm grumpy now. But kids were being told they were failures. And it really got on my nerves. I'm telling you, proper got on my nerves. And I wasn't slow in telling folk. Made me quite unpopular, how shall we say. Someone said, a criticism somebody made of me to a higher up power. He does not suffer fools gladly. And that was put to me. And I said, well, yeah, well, they should be fools then, should they? Then I wouldn't have to suffer them. It's not my problem. I am not backing down. And I didn't. Didn't make any friends, but I didn't back down. Anyway, we started playing Dungeons and Dragons. But what we were playing was The Hobbit. We were following Bilbo and Frodo and people through the Shire and down to Mordor. And we were role-playing it. And I was using the Dungeons and Dragons mechanism, but I wasn't playing Dungeons and Dragons. And I had kids. I went to an Indian restaurant. Oh God, years later, 20, 30 years later. And the waiter came out to get me order and he went, Mr. Wood, yeah, it's me, Abdul. Do you remember playing Dungeons and Dragons? I thought, yeah, fantastic. We spent all night talking. He sort of shuffled my wife and kids out of the way and sat down. We started having a big chat about things he remembered. So we did that. Now, through the 80s, the game changed. Companies changed. People couldn't call their figures things that were in Lord of the Rings because of copyright. Early on, if you look at the very, very early true Dungeons and Dragons modules, you could have characters that were hobbits. You could have orcs spelt like they are by Tolkien. But that all had to change. So hobbits became halflings. Orcs began to be spelt with a K. Because they're not the same. They're different. Well, they were the same, weren't they? But you know what I'm saying. But the figures started to be made by more people. And they weren't made under license, so they got more adventurous. They became more, I think miniature figurines started to call theirs sword and sorcery. And then you weren't hampered by licenses to make Tolkien figures, because that's not what you were doing. And then as the modules came out, and the monsters came, like gnolls, for example, companies were, oh, we need to make a gnoll. Okay then, so they started appearing. And the goblins changed. So I moved on from miniature figurines, goblins, to, I'll show you the picture. These are Asgard. The Grenadier were making them, Citadel were making them, Hinchcliffe were making them, and there was Games Workshops went around in the early 80s. They might have been appearing in big cities by 84, 85, but where I lived, they weren't. But toy shops, model shops, railway shops started to sell lead wargame figures. So you always had a selection wherever you went. Sometimes, I went to York once and there were about 6 different shops, all selling brilliant things from historical right through to science fiction. And you used to just randomly go on holiday anywhere and you guarantee you'd find a shop with something. It's brilliant. Not now. Another high horse. I'm not getting on that one. No, go away, high horse. That's it, clip-clopping into the distance. So I like these sorts of Asgard ones, and they fitted quite nicely with my miniature figurine ones. They didn't look out of place. So I carried on with that. Then my brother, my youngest brother, introduced me to this range. And that ended my quest for other goblins. These were the ones I stuck with. I love the fact that, you know, they've got hoods up, they look like wood goblins. They look like goblins. I was sort of, Games Workshop went off a bit orky, crude. They looked a bit comic, and snotlings I couldn't be doing with them. They're all right for a bit of mischief in a dungeon, aren't they? But not for me. But these lads look like wood goblins. They look like the sort of goblins you'd encounter, like elves. They look like they can handle themselves, and they've put a bit of thought into what they're wearing. They're not thick, and I like that. But I never really got into bad armies anyway. I was always elves. That was what I tended to be, an elf man. Right from the start, right from 74. University, I used to try and dress like an elf. It was brown, green, something with a hood on. What's he doing, looking at me through that bush? Oh, he thinks he's an elf, ignore him. What's he doing? Oh, he's doing a degree. Oh, yeah, right. Aesthetic. That's what he's told you, he's thick as a plank. Then some lads would run out in white coats and drag me away. I said, oh no, leave me alone. So yeah, I didn't really fall into that. Everyone else was playing with goblins and orcs and stuff, but my elves got more and more Citadel-y and Games Workshop-y, but I wasn't impressed. And even when the film Goblins came out, I still like my original ones more. But I did buy a lot of those Lord of the Rings film ones, and I know there's a new range coming out, and maybe I'll be tempted. I don't know. I haven't looked at them. I've deliberately not looked at them because I recently gave away everything I had if it was bought after 1990, because I've gone back. And these goblins that I've shown you, quick reminder, are the ones I'm using now. They've come back. They're my goblins. They're my goblins in Dungeons and Dragons. They're my goblins in fantasy war games. They're my goblins in my world of Jural. This is what goblins look like. So I've gone full circle. I mean, there were some interesting other things. For example, I'll show you these. This was a very early miniature figurines. I call him a greater goblin. I suspect he was an orc. But he's a big lad. He's pretty terrifying. But if you compare that to what I'm going to show you now, they were 1973 genuine miniature figurines Urukai man-orcs. So you can see the difference. And I've got a lot of these. And I love them. I absolutely love them. And a lot of my big fantasy battles now, and I've made some videos of them, which I'll put on as little cards at the end. I won't do it straight away, so if you watch this straight away, you'll not see them, but if you wait a bit, you will. And I've made some videos about my other fantasy armies. But I just love them. I love the whole look. And it's not just a nostalgia of making me think I'm 15, 16 again. I really like the figures. Call me old-fashioned. You're old-fashioned! Ta-ra, Chuck.